Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. Why is it that Canada has so many people but so little productivity? This is a question that high-ranking public servants have studied and mulled over and discussed and debated for years. Finally, an in-depth survey of working Canadians was distributed by mail in an effort to once for all clarify Canada's productivity crisis. A countrywide team of interdisciplinary bureaucrats held countless meetings to prepare the long-awaited survey. At one such meeting, it was resolutely decided to schedule a meeting for the following week to discuss whether the first meeting was necessary in the first place. The following week, as the minutes from the previous week's meeting were being reviewed, a minor error was discovered that required more funding. A special review committee was quickly formed and given 1 to 2 years to review the matter, study it at length, and provide detailed recommendations. 3 years later, the public servants completed their terms on the committee, received pensions, and new committee members were voted in. After several more meetings, their ultimate recommendation was to send the survey. Finally, stamps were strategically sourced and envelopes were curated, and the survey was sent off immediately to all working Canadians. The survey asked 3 questions. Are you working? Are you Canadian? Are you productive? We are still waiting for the results. And while we wait, we are talking to Richard Diaz. Richard is co-host of the Loonie Hour podcast and private wealth analyst at IceCap Asset Management. We want to know if he has the answer to Canada's productivity crisis. We also talk inflation, immigration, environmentalism, and more. To get in touch with the show, visit twostewards.ca. Remember, this show is not financial advice, but is valuable for listening amusement purposes. Now, let's get productive.
Okay, we're going to have to get Gideon to edit that part out. But welcome, everybody. Today we're joined by Ricardo Diaz. I don't know. How is that?
No, you're not allowed to call me Ricardo. My mom's gonna jump through the computer. Richard.
Richard. Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't know how in touch you were with that side of things. But we have Rich Diaz. And anybody listening may know him from the immensely popular podcast, The Loonie Hour. So welcome, Rich.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate I'm honored and privileged to be here. Really appreciate you guys giving me the time, and thank you for having me.
Hey, we're honored to have you on, man. I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I don't know, Brent, are you a fan? You're a fan.
Oh, I'm always a fan, yeah.
Okay. So, Rich, you're joining us from Portugal. And anybody who's listening to the Loonie Hour knows that you've been on vacation, workcation from Europe. And how come you're still in Portugal? What happened?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I am Portuguese, and some people do call me Ricardo, though my mom would get pissed. She is very adamant about that. No, my family, my background is Portuguese. My mother grew up in this beautiful little town in the mountains. Called Serra Santo Antonio. It's a very tiny town, a very sort of a agrarian type place. And I came here for what was supposed to be like 3 weeks, has turned into 4. And I'm stuck basically because of the Air Canada strike. It's as simple as that. And I was supposed to leave last Monday, the 18th, I believe. And when I called them originally, they said, "Oh, we'll give you a flight on the 29th." And I was like, you've got to be kidding. And so after 3.5 hours on hold, I finally managed to get myself a flight on the 25th. But wow. Don't feel sorry for me. I'm with my aunt and my uncle, and it's beautiful here. I feel bad for all the families.
Poor Rich, he's stuck in Portugal. Oh, no.
I feel bad for the families who take like one or two one vacation a week. You know what I mean? And might have to be at an office or a desk or whatever. But
yeah, I guess you got a forgiving boss, so that's
exactly.
So maybe we'll talk about that for a second. You're at IceCap Global Management. What do you guys do there?
Yeah, so IceCap Asset Management is an asset management business, and we manage money for families all across Canada and different parts of the world. We have a couple clients in Singapore, we have a client in Australia, and all over the world, really. And we manage money for families. We are a conservative asset allocator, and I think we think about the world differently. I think that's fundamental to our value proposition. I think it's fair to call us conservative, but I also think it's fair that we focus on capital preservation and protecting the assets and wealth of families rather than taking sort of unmitigated and risks that people might otherwise be involved with respect to other asset managers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. So I had this picture of like, The Big Short. You guys are huddled in an office going like, we got to short the market. And so...
That's a good point, actually. So we're a long only fund. We're a long only fund. And the reason I think we focus really very much on risk. And I think a lot of the problems with the other asset managers in our business is, they say that they got a good return 1 year or whatever. And a lot of their returns, or what they do often is on good years they ascribe that return to their skill set, and in bad years they say, oh well, bad luck, no one saw it coming.
It's the market.
And we yeah, it's the market, and we sort of hate that. And what we try to do is we try to take a risk first approach with the money that families have spent a lot of time and energy accumulating. And the reason we do that is because we think that if you manage risk and you really focus on preventing significant drawdowns, the sort of cumulative impact of compounding, sort of your returns will sort of take care of themselves over the long run. And the reason that's really important is because it's fine to say that, oh yeah, over the long term markets do really well, whatever. But the problem is it's tough to time that. And so right when you might be retiring or about to make a big purchase or what have you, if the market's down 20%, that might cause a significant amount of friction, both internally or with your partner or what have you, or might seriously affect what you can or can't do when you retire. And so we're really sort of on the capital preservation end. We really focus on risks, and we sort of abhor the sort of old-timey allocation strategies that you might get at the big banks in Canada.
So no 60-40 for you guys, hard and fast. What about meme coins? You got any good meme coins we could invest in?
we should start one. We should start one. But no,
we're
highly regulated.
The Loonie coin.
I would love to do that, but no, sadly, we keep it easy. I think right now, we'll get into this. Right now, we're sort of shying away from long-term bonds. We're a little bit worried about the equity market, but there are ways that families can allocate their capital into strategies that sort of prevent downside risk and actually sort of take advantage of some upside opportunities. And so that's what we try to do.
Great. So just so people kind of understand a bit of your background, like what's your role there, and like how did you come to this? Just quickly, like,
yeah, sure.
What's your
my background is as a global macro strategist, and what that means is basically I'm an economist by trade, and I try to translate the view of an economy and the risks and opportunities, and I try to translate that into portfolio strategy. And my background, I grew up in Montreal, went to McGill, and then I lived in London for a long time. Worked for a hedge fund, which was an amazing experience and opportunity. And that's where I sort of learned to transform or translate economic views, whether it's inflation or money supply or growth, unemployment, risks, all kinds of different things that you sort of talk about and think about when you think about an economy, into allocating a asset allocation and portfolio construction. And so my role at IceCap is really the same thing, plus the sales, but also just like, coming up with ideas, thinking about risks and opportunities, providing not only sort of the structure and strategy around how do you think about the market and what are the risks and opportunities out there, and providing sort of that extra level of thinking and structure around our investment process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, England is a great place for hedges. They got them all over. So it's,
It was honestly, it was amazing. London was it's like the NFL or the NHL. I mean, it's like New York or London is no disrespect to Toronto or Montreal or other places around the world, but it was extremely competitive and hard, but it was a great school, and I'm really, really grateful for my time there.
Yeah, and I mean that's the one of the things I appreciate about you is your commentary, your knowledge on the markets, and just on Twitter, right? Everybody's listening, follow Richard Diaz on Twitter. Lots of great information if you're into that sort of thing, and if you're not, then it's probably pretty boring.
Yeah, my Twitter is pretty dry, I'll admit. But
a lot of graphs and
I
charts.
don't think so. I think it's awesome.
I love charts and data. I think,
Yeah.
And we were talking before we got on, before we started recording, which is like, I think there's just Canadians spend way too much time thinking about America and Americans and Europe and Japan, and so I've sort of made it my mission to just like pivot and talk about and think about and share what I think is going on in Canada. So hopefully people enjoy it.
So what is going on in Canada?
Oh man,
Where do we start, Mark?
Well, let's start with America. I know you just said like
no,
let's
it's
not do
part
that,
of it.
but I mean it's sort of the the big dog, right? So Jackson Hole, this is the once a year meeting of the the central bank governors in the states, and they I don't know what they actually do there, but it's a good excuse for them to get away. And so Jerome Powell had a speech, and I know you didn't review the whole thing in depth, but my clickbait takeaway is that the Fed is no longer concerned about inflation, and they're only focusing on employment. What do you think of that, Rich?
I think you're right. I think what's important that people understand is the Federal Reserve, which is the name of the central bank for America, is a dual mandate central bank. So they have an inflation mandate, and it's not as specific or as precise as the Canadian one, or the British one, or the European one, or even the Japanese one. It's just an inflation, to keep inflation within some kind of range. And they also have a full employment mandate, which is also quite a nebulous kind of fluffy.
There needs to be
clear what. Sorry,
there needs to be some jobs. All right, we got that checked.
It's not, full employment is never. It's not explicit what that means. Is it an unemployment rate? Is it participant? Whatever. But the reason I bring that up is because they have a dual mandate, and so often there's a criticism about whether they're switching to one or the other. And so the fact that they've pivoted away from inflation to full employment as their raison d'être for future rate cuts is not, in my view, outside of their remit. This is very much different than in Canada, where in Canada has a single mandate, which is inflation targeting 2% and with a plus or minus 1% range. So basically 1 to 3 with a target of 2. And so the fact that they are angling towards rate cuts with the view that they're worried about the labor market, I think is not only again within their remit, but frankly I think it was priced in. So what does priced in mean? It means that different financial market indicators had already sussed it out. They had already sort of figured out that was what the speech was going to be about, what the tone and the language was going to be. And the way I know that to be true is because of the dollar barely moved, the 10-year bond yield, the treasury yield moved at 7 basis points, which is not a dramatic change. The stock market didn't move that much. It was positive on the news. And then also you have interest rate expectations, again, didn't really move, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, like you said, kind of priced in. So just talking about inflation, because you've posted a little bit about inflation recently, and I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on, like, is inflation necessary? So this is one argument, right? That we need a little bit of inflation every year in order to keep the economy going, and it's just we tend to I remember as long as I've known for my life, inflation is just a thing. That's part of the economy. And, come to realize, or we've come to believe that no, inflation is not necessary and it's actually bad. But like, what is your take on, I don't know, the role of inflation in a centrally planned, in a democratic economy?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really happy you asked me that. So like when people say like price stability, and somehow central bankers have been able to like, I don't know, magic voodoo, like, Jedi mind trick people into thinking that price stability means 2%, right? That's their
Increase.
target. 2% increase every year. But like literally that is kind of it's nuts, right? So if prices are stable, that means they don't change. And somehow they've been able to Jedi mind trick everyone into thinking that if prices increase 2% per year, that's price stability.
They
And
didn't
so
Jedi mind trick us, though.
yeah, well, no, not at all.
We're catching
and so,
up.
I can't remember who said it. I'm quickly trying to find it. I view inflation as is taxation without representation. I think it was Milton Friedman who said that. And so, I think inflation is not okay. I think inflation, the target should be 0 and not 2%. You might call me a hawk. I don't know if some people who listen may or may not be familiar with what a hawk or a dove is, but I'm of the view that inflation is taxation without representation. It's a way to structurally devalue the purchasing power of in my view, of working class people. Something I talk a lot about on the Loonie Hour. And the idea that effectively in Canada that 3 is the new 2, right? Because the target is 2, but inflation and core inflation in Canada is 3% roughly and trending higher. And yet the Bank of Canada is considering cutting interest rates. To me, it's an outrage. It is something that I'm not okay with. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Well, what frustrates you about that then? Like you said, it's an outrage, but like, and you kind of alluded to like the everyday person, like the low end of the wealth spectrum getting hit by this.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to, because like, what is inflation? It means the rising prices of goods and services across the board. And fundamentally, I think the issue is, I'm of the view, now some people might disagree with this, but I'm of the view that basically wages always lag. So wage growth will lag inflation. So just as a silly example, prices go up, you work for a union, maybe Air Canada, maybe that's a bad example because they're overpaid. But let's just say you work as a coal miner, whatever. Just as a philosophical sort of idea, you see your prices go up, you're a day laborer or you're a wage worker, then you're like, I'm falling behind, and you go to your boss and you say, prices are going up, can I have some kind of wage adjustment, cost of living adjustment, in order to make my ends meet, so I'm not falling behind. And so in my view, just structurally, the laborer is always chasing. And so and then this doesn't include sort of the cyclical downturns. So let's say you have a recession, which happens all the time. Then you have unemployment. Unemployment means you have an oversupply of labor, you have a less demand, which means unemployment rises. The price of that labor, e.g. wages, will fall. So not only have you fallen behind because of the normal increases of prices, of the cost of living, but then you might have a cyclical knock, a cyclical lag when you literally are not employed. And so the wage earner, the working class people are dinged twice. And even in situations where unemployment is very, very low, you still might be chasing that increase in wage. Whereas the asset holder, whether you own businesses, whether you own equities, the reality is your real, quote unquote, real asset, your physical hard asset, is simply denominated in some currency. and that currency, has been seashells or rocks or gold or, Bitcoin or whatever it is. And so you still have the house. And so it's just denominated. And so the value of the house hasn't, quote unquote, changed. It's that the unit of measurement that you're using to purchase it has dropped, if that makes any sense.
And the working class people are the guys who don't own the assets.
In general, you have wealthy people own assets, and in general, working class people just simply don't. And then that's not to mention the idea that if you borrow money, if interest rates are very low or interest rates are below inflation, you effectively, theoretically, are borrowing for negative money. So in effect, you're getting paid to borrow. Do poor people borrow lots of money? Generally, no. They might have a credit card balance. Hopefully not, but they might. Whereas rich people might have a home or a business that they lever up, which is, fancy language for borrow against, and they use that collateral and leverage to get a very, very low interest rate. And so they win on both ends. Do you know what I'm saying? And so to me, this is why inflation is such a pernicious and nasty thing. And for the government of Canada Bank of Canada to implicitly allow inflation to rise and not to fight it properly, I think is basically, in effect, the transfer of wealth from the labor class to the asset holder.
Yeah, and I think we've argued as well that this is also hollowing out the middle class, right? At 2%, middle class can kind of keep up, and because I feel that the main characteristic of the middle class is that they are very good wage earners. Maybe not super asset rich, but make lots of wages. So I'm talking about, it could be doctors, civil servants, whoever, who have a very healthy wages, but not a lot in the way of assets. And I think that's typically sort of been our middle class, and maybe your asset has been real estate, but we've seen what's happened with real estate lately. And when you talked about earlier, like, your focus is sort of on risk mitigation and wealth preservation rather than growth, right? So yeah, if real estate drops 20-30% and you were counting on that to retire, it's a great long-term strategy, but if you need it right now, that's not it's not the best thing. And I think a lot of people are seeing that right now. And yeah, I think the middle class is just been getting killed with the huge amount of inflation that we've had. And not to say nothing of the of people who aren't high wage earners, they're just absolutely getting left behind. So I mean, yeah, you sound a lot like a Bitcoiner, Rich.
I mean, listen, I'll be honest with you. It's funny because I was an early adopter to Bitcoin, like in 2011. I think
that's early.
I was introduced to it for reasons that I can't articulate on this podcast. It's family friendly show. But I will say, like, one of the reasons I've always been worried about Bitcoin is because ultimately, if I was a central government, I would never allow it. Right? Because and so I'm shocked that they've let it get this far. Because one of the and I guess I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, right? On one side, I'm, annoyed and frustrated that they've allowed inflation to rise, etc. But on the other side, I'm saying, well, if I was a central bank, I would never allow Bitcoin to exist. And to me, I think that those two positions are extremely consistent with one another. Because the privilege a central government has is to devalue its currency in order to pay for things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get legislative authority or backing in order to do. And that's what I'm saying. Inflation is a form of taxation, right? Because the government is nominally meant to control the money supply. In conjunction with banks, but just, let's keep things simple. And so for them to allow an alternative source of money outside of their control, I'm shocked. And the example I would give you is in 1933, when the government of the U.S. government basically made holding gold illegal, right? And so I've always thought in the back of my mind, that was a huge risk. And I guess that I've been spectacularly wrong in that they haven't said this is a big risk to our.
What happened in the 30s though when they said holding gold is illegal? What happened to all the government officials who held gold? Did they turn their gold in? Because I'm wondering, like, now we got guys in the government own Bitcoin. Like,
yeah,
they're kind of incentivized.
I mean, I can't speak to that. I don't know. But I think government employees, they're making money other ways. I mean, I don't want to get into the whole insider trading thing, but they don't need Bitcoin to go up to make money.
Just look up Nancy Pelosi, everybody.
Yeah, that's who I was. I didn't want to say it, but you said it. So she's the greatest hedge fund. She's the greatest hedge fund manager that's ever existed.
Absolutely. Well, I think we have our own in Canada. We were going to do like a Mark Carney ETF or something.
Yeah.
Just follow Brookfield Asset, and you'll probably do well.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I can't give investment advice.
I know you can't comment on that. So, okay, just one more thing, I guess, on the U.S. Do you think that they're going to let inflation rip? I mean, this isn't my theory necessarily, but I sort of subscribe to it, right? Looking back at the 40s when debt was over 100% of GDP, right? End of the Second World War. And I think Jamie Dimon kind of brought this up, and I think Lynn Alden picked up on it as well. That essentially they really dropped their debt balance down just by letting inflation run high. So at the end of the 40s, like in the early 50s, they had reduced it by something like 50%. And we know that Trump is focused on debt, and Scott Bessent has talked about that as well, right? Like they are worried about nominally they say that, and then you look at the big beautiful bill and you're like, what are you talking about? But they want to reduce debt as a percentage of GDP. So do you think that might be the strategy going forward, is let inflation run hot to reduce government debt regardless of the knock-on effects of that?
Yeah, 100%. Now, I know my boss disagrees with this, Keith, God love him. I just want to inflation is not low. I'm looking at headline inflation in the U.S. is 2.7%. Core inflation is 3.0%. There's something called a Cleveland Fed trimmed mean CPI, which is basically you lop off the low and high bits of your distribution curve when it comes to inflation. That's at 3.2%, and it's been going up the last 4 or 5 months. So I think what the Fed is telling Canadian people, and I would argue what the Bank of England is telling you, right? And they cut interest rates even though inflation's 4.16%. Is that I think virtually all of these central bankers are implicitly suggesting that they don't care about inflation, and that the way that they're going to deal with the debt burdens that these countries have, whether it's Canada, whether it's US, whether it's UK, whatever it is that they're going to let the economies run hot in order to provide cover for governments to run huge budget deficits. And again, I talk a lot on the Loonie Hour about working class people, because ultimately, if you, again, sorry to repeat myself, but if you own assets, equities, a house, land, you're in effect insulated from these decisions. And if you're a wage laborer, then you're totally screwed by this. And so, I'm really, really not a big fan of central banks this decade or the last decade, and I think they're demonstrating to me that they should all be fired.
Do they? Well, so do they have any other option for this other than letting inflation? So, what? Maybe map out for people what other things can they do to kind of fix this without?
They can do their job. That they can be independent, right? Because this is in effect, I mean, I don't want to use I'm going to say it anyways, but this is the lie that we've sort of been told, right? They're nominally meant to be independent, and meaning they should not have any political influence with respect to their decision making.
Yeah, you're talking about the bank and the government, right?
The central banks.
The central bank.
They should be outside any political pressure, which is why I think, for example, certain politicians in Canada should be not reprimanded, but derided for commenting on interest rates, right? The whole point and the reason why developed economies have in general had lower inflation is because of the separation between church and state, right? You have a group of people who cannot help themselves, the government, but spend money, and a group of people who are nominally meant to be outside of those political pressures. And those two sort of opposing forces are meant to have some kind of balance. When you have central bankers that cannot stand up to that political pressure, the whole game unravels, which is what we see in, which we've seen in all of these, not to paint an entire continent with the same brush, but that's what happens in banana republics in South America, where you have central bankers that are supposed to be independent, under pressure to keep rates low and let inflation run hot. And what happens is there are second order effects to these bad decisions, which is people sell those bonds because they know they're not going to get paid back in real terms. Inflation expectations get unhinged from hopefully long-term norms or what they want. There are all kinds of these negative impacts, and what you need is a central banker to say, no, my job is not to make things easier for a government. And to say, sorry for the noise,
there goes your flight home.
Yeah, that's right. And to say to governments, we're not going to play ball. Our job is to keep to target inflation. And if you want interest rates to come down, you need to run a balanced budget. And so you ask me, what are they supposed to do? In my view, nothing. The onus is on governments to not run massive budget deficits.
Do you think they can do that? Is there enough political willpower to, that would include some kind of cuts or some kind of austerity?
I think
that's the reality that we need to face, but I just wonder if they have the guts to do it.
No, I do not think that they'd have the testicular fortitude to do this, and I think nobody wants. So, for example, just to give you again, we're talking about the U.S. So the U.S. right now is running a negative 6% budget balance, or 5.6% budget deficit, and unemployment rate's at 4.2. So the Keynesian theory is when unemployment rises, the government should step in and provide some kind of cushion for domestic demand. And so by that, for more or less for the last 60 or 70 years, when unemployment rate fell, meaning jobs are plentiful, the economy is doing relatively well, the idea was you run a tight ship. You don't spend more than you collect. And for the last, let's say, before COVID, by the way, you had a situation where unemployment was falling, and they were running massive budget deficits. And the ironic thing is, it's not a left-wing thing or a right-wing thing. Both Biden and Trump ran completely, irresponsible budget deficits. And so right now you have relatively low unemployment, and you have a massive budget deficit. It's the same thing in France, England. And so this idea that these budget deficits are benign is wrong, and people need to come to terms with that. And so why I care as an investment manager is because we are thinking about what it means for our clients, how do we protect them, etc. This is why we don't favor bonds. Supply demand. If they're issuing lots of debt, which is what the budget deficit is, by the way, which is you're issuing lots of paper in order to fund your spending, that means you're increasing supply of a given product, and the demand may or may not be there, and so we're worried about the price. And Canada's the same. Mark Carney's about to run a massive budget deficit. And
we wouldn't know, would we?
We wouldn't. Which, by the way, is
There's
insane.
No
It is insane that it is not. Completely irresponsible and wild to me that we're going to wait almost 6 months into the fiscal year before getting any indication of what's going on. But yeah, so and this idea that I remember, and this is not a time when we're already running huge budget. And like, I think the problem is people think that these budget deficits are benign, but they're not. It just basically, again, like I talk about this all the time on the podcast. It's like you're basically, instead of cleansing the system and ensuring these asset holders who've had the best run ever, basically, all you're doing is supporting asset rich people and punishing the working class. That's what these deficits do. And people say, Rich, when the unemployment rises, working class people take a hit. Yes, that's true, but at least there's some cleansing of the system, and we're not allowing Canada to do that. And so, the story just goes on and on.
So yeah, I think Stephanie Kelton would disagree with you. I don't know if you were familiar with her. But
is that the MMT lady?
Yes. Yeah,
because she owns a house and she's not a working class person. And, doesn't matter how much evidence to prove her wrong. She will, always wrong and never in doubt or something. I think there's a great expression about that.
Well, do you know
the MMT people are jokers. I mean,
do you know any hedge fund managers who are well, of course they're proponents of MMT, but who would, I'm just saying, I think MMT is limited to academia and not people who are managing money.
Let me correct you. The MMT works if, big fat I, big fat F, governments rein in their spending. But that's the point. The point is that never, ever, ever happens. Nobody will, do you know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm running for office, I'm not going to say, okay, cool, now that employment is low, I'm going to stop spending right into an election cycle. The problem with MMT is that it completely ignores normal human behavior, which makes it completely useless as a theory. The whole point is, because we have election cycles, as soon as, let's say, unemployment hits, so you don't care about deficits, you don't care about money supply, you don't care about inflation, fine, unemployment drops, and then when unemployment is low, you're supposed to say as a government, okay, great, we've reached our quote-unquote goal, now we're going to raise taxes and reduce spending. Right into an election cycle, and the next guy or girl goes, well, vote for me, and I'm going to I'm going to lower taxes and increase spending. And so in effect, it's like, obviously you will never do that into an election cycle. Ergo, you wouldn't do it anyways. And so that's why MMT falls on basically any kind of, even the minor scrutiny.
Well, I mean, that's the criticism of Keynesian economics, right? Is that it doesn't take into account human behavior. It's just math and no human behavior.
Well, no, I challenge that, because if you look at Keynes's treatise on economics, like, his view was you are supposed to run budget surpluses in good times, and I would argue that Canada has done that, and the U.S. has done that, or at the minimum they've run much lower deficits. In 2008, George Bush, he was running a very, very low negative, like a deficit of 1 or 1.5%. Bill Clinton ran a surplus of 3%. Paul Martin ran a budget surplus. Stephen Harper's deficit was virtually nil. And so the idea is that you sort of save in the good years to spend in the bad years. But I agree with you in a sense that,
it seems like every year lately is just a bad year, so just keep spending.
Well, this to me, this speaks to a different issue. And it's, again, something I talk about on the podcast a lot, which is there's another way to solve this. And the way to solve this
is UBI?
No, please. Oh, okay. No, please. I mean, this is like the greatest hits of stupid ideas. No, I mean, the way we deal with this is increase productivity growth.
Whoa. How do we do that?
Yeah, I was going to say, Canada,
where we don't have anything except for real estate.
Well, I mean, we actually have the third largest oil reserves in the world. We have the fifth or sixth largest natural gas reserves in the world. We have we have a third of the world's fresh water. We probably have all the lithium you ever need, gold. We have virtually every critical mineral we need, rare earth metals or whatever. I always get that screwed up, but you know what I mean? We've got loads of stuff to sell and use. And
Rich, I was reliably informed that there is no business case for especially like liquid natural gas. So I don't know. Maybe you need to go back to school.
I mean, how do you guys feel about that comment?
Oh, dude, same thing. Like, just steam off my head. Like, why are we not an energy superpower? And I think, just to rant a little bit, we had the energy minister going like, yeah, we're going to be an energy superpower. And his big thing was, we're going to put solar panels on citizens' roofs. Like, that's how we're going to achieve energy supremacy what are you talking about? Like, fine. You know what? I will, if you're going to give them for free, I'll put them on my house, and I'm going to run a Bitcoin miner and also feed back into the electrical system. But like, yeah, energy is the key to human productivity and to human ingenuity, and like
cheap energy.
Plentiful and cheap. And so for a nation like us to, I mean, I think we're on the same page here. Like, it's ludicrous, and we've strangled ourselves needlessly in the name of environmentalism. I
mean, I think there's a couple things to unpack there. Number one, I think environmentalism needs to be more than just CO2 emissions. Okay, so environmentalism to me means keeping our rivers clean, our lakes clean, not polluting the dirt and soil that we use to farm things, keeping our air clean outside of CO2, which is what trees breathe. It's about biodiversity, something we never talk about. It's about taking care of our forests and allowing the natural attrition, which is forest fires. Environmentalism is something that's really, really important to me. And the hyper focus on this unique soul, like this monolith of the only thing that counts as environmentalism is CO2, to me is completely nuts.
Yeah. Why do they only care about that? I mean,
because I think we're going to talk about it, because I think it's in a world. You're going to get you might get banned, but I think it's the new religion. I think climate change is the new religion. I think it's in a secular world, we need a thing that it like has all the hallmarks of religion, which is it has original sin, it has martyrs, it has, you have to pay your tithe, you've got the prophets, it's just amazing. You just like rattle off all the things that you would describe, let's say Christianity or whatever are the main religions, and it's just like tick, 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 tick. And to me, it's really, in my view, very shallow view of what it means to care, quote unquote, about the environment. Like, I think clean rivers and lakes are caring about the environment. I think, not polluting our soil. I think plastics are a part of taking care of the environment. I think.
Yeah, just to push back on that though, like sure. I have kids, and then we give them these juice boxes, and I try and put a straw in the juice box, and like the juice box has been sitting in the cooler like all afternoon, and it's full of like water, right? So you pull out this thing, you're trying to shove a flimsy straw.
No, I'm for plastic.
Like,
you got me there.
I got to share a straw. I got the one good straw, and I got to share it between the kids, right? Like, when you're done, give me this flimsy paper straw, put it in here. Like, come on.
Well, that's what's so nuts. Like it's what's amazing is, like, Canadians, I think, again, I'm gonna get in trouble, but like, we're so brainwashed. Like, the West is relatively good at not throwing plastic in the ocean. Okay, so like 95% of all the plastic waste comes from like 12 countries, and we know exactly where they are on a map. And it's not Canada. Like, and this idea that we're gonna like, and it's the same with emissions. Like, China produces more emissions than the entire Western world combined. Okay, so Canada is like 1.5% of global emissions. Canada could be wiped off the face of the earth tomorrow, and it would not make a lick of difference. Now, does that mean we should just pollute with impunity? No, of course not. But Canadian emissions peaked in 2012. U.S. emissions peaked in 2007. European emissions peaked in the early 2000s. Like, we are not the issue. And people will push back and say, oh, well, it's consumption versus production. It's because we've exported all our production to China. That's bogus. The data is very, very clear on this. Even if you account for the consumption part, China is absolutely the issue, and the reason they're the issue is because the 60% of their energy comes from coal, and coal has 50% more emissions than natural gas. Let's not even get into nuclear. You know what I mean? And so, I think fundamentally, Mark, I think Canadians just have this massive cognitive dissonance around all kinds of subjects, and I would argue that not only our politicians have exploited that, to what end I have no idea, but our media is derelict in their duty to just simply articulate what I think is very, very straightforward and obvious data. Like, this is not, I'm not I think I'm pretty smart. I'm no genius. The data's out there. And, Canada is a petro state. We are the fourth largest producer of oil in the world. We produce about 5 million barrels of oil per day. A barrel of oil is 289 or whatever liters. Think about how crazy that is. Right? The number one is US with about 13. Number two is like Russia and Saudi Arabia. They jockey for position depending on what's going on at OPEC. Let's say 11 or 12 each. Again, they change. Canada's number 4. Number 5 is China. And then again, we jockey for position with them. And then there's a whole bunch, Iraq, Iran, all these other countries. And if it wasn't for us exporting massive amounts of oil, so we consume about 2 million barrels of oil a day, we export about 93.2% or 93 point whatever percent goes to the US via pipeline. There's 400,000 kilometers of pipeline between the US and Canada, which makes you, remember all the bloviating over the Keystone pipeline? There's 400. Think about. I can't even like understand what 400,000 kilometers of anything means, let alone massive pipelines. So Canadians have this like view that if we just like put a bunch of solar panels and drive EVs, we're gonna like structurally change the world with respect to emissions. It's completely nuts. That is not true at all. Anyway,
I'm 100% on the same page, and So my theory about the whole CO2, you're right. We're focusing on the wrong thing. Carbon emissions are not the problem, but I think it's wealth redistribution writ large, right, across the globe, and that's that's my conspiracy theorist thing, but it's pretty obvious, right? It's just, I don't know if you want to call it Western guilt or whatever, but it's just a way to redistribute wealth, but. As far as the energy side goes, if we really wanted to reduce, if you're worried about emissions, let's get lots of natural gas into China so they stop building new coal plants. That would have an outsized effect on that, right? Let's make energy
100%.
abundant and cheap for the third world, because when people are not worried about where their next meal is coming from, once they reach a certain, get above subsistence, they're much more environmentally minded as well, right? If you don't know that you're going to have food for your kids tomorrow, you're able to cook, you'll burn whatever's in sight. You will cut down trees, do whatever, right? Once you're a little more comfortable, you'll be like, well, I live here. I want this to be nice. So if we can get cheap, ethical Canadian energy across the world, that would have such an effect. And again, I don't buy into the CO2 thing, but if you were concerned about that, we have the solution, right? Canadian energy throughout the world. But I think we're both blowing the same horn here.
What's I agree, and sorry, maybe this is a bit, we're getting a little lathered up here a little bit, but I think, to me, on their own terms, they don't make sense.
Yeah.
Right? So if you genuinely, again, you guys are going to get banned, so I apologize for that. If you genuinely
it's not your podcast, don't worry about it.
Fine. If you genuinely think that climate change is the single most important threat to humanity, then you must act that way. So Germany just shut down 6 nuclear power plants. Insane. Canada, so I have the stats in front of me. I share this on Twitter all the time. 56.4% of Canada's electricity generation is hydro. Then natural gas at 16%. Then then nuclear power plant at 14%. Then wind at 7.3% and whatever. What I'm saying to you is in Nova Scotia, here's an example. Nova Scotia, 60% of Nova Scotia's energy comes from coal. If it is that big an issue, we should be building nuclear power plants in Nova Scotia 10 years ago. And so on their own terms, they don't even make sense, right? So, if you don't, you don't, it's just like it just unravels any kind of scrutiny, any kind of intellectual pressure that you put on their own view, on their own terms, it all falls apart. And so, fundamentally, I actually don't believe that they believe it. And I think, Mark, you made the point. It's about redistribution, whatever. You said it, not me. I'm very sympathetic to that view. I think if we really cared about emissions, we would be pumping natural gas like it was going out of business to get everyone. India has doubled down on coal. Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world with almost 350 odd million people in the world, have doubled down on coal. China's building 354 coal-fired power plants with another 100 and whatever in the pipeline. I mean, the U.S. has managed to cut their emissions by 20% from the peak. How did they do it? They retrofitted an entire generation of coal-fired power plants to burn natural gas. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, I find it beyond frustrating. And then what they do in Canada is they say, we're going to ban internal combustion engines, so you have to buy EVs. It's like, I honestly believe they don't believe it. I genuinely,
I think that's the most frustrating thing is that, like, if they were ideologues and believed it, like, I would still be upset, but I could understand it. But when you see it, it's hypocrisy. I mean, you talk about biomass, right? Germany has all this clean energy. Well, it's just wood chips from U.S. trees. They're just cutting down trees, repackaging them as biomass, and it's clean energy. So
I mean, trees are renewable. No, they do grow.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine, but don't call it like, it's clean, whatever, renewable. I mean, it is renewable energy, but it's the way they package it. So
I mean, listen,
okay.
Mark, the answer is nuclear power. So we can move on or whatever. The answer, everyone is like, everyone is like navel gazing, circling around what I think is a painfully obvious answer. If France can do it, everybody can do it.
That's true. That's the Portuguese in you right there.
Yeah, that's right.
European envy. So I made a joke about UBI. I feel it's inevitable. What do you think in Canada?
Fundamentally, if you subsidize everybody, you subsidize nobody.
Yeah, but it sounds good.
Okay, I'm not saying it's a good idea.
Oh, sounds good on an election ticket, right? Like,
well, that's we
need it. Our safety, security,
Yeah.
You look at employment numbers, right? Youth unemployment, especially, is like ridiculous.
Well, it's because we allowed 3 million people, unskilled, young people, to come into our country.
Yeah, okay, but aside from that, like, what are you talking about with all these facts and figures, Rich? That's ridiculous. I don't know. I think it's not long before that. I mean, it's been floated right in the Senate and so forth as kind of like a public opinion test, I think. So
I think UBI will be a complete disaster. Yeah. And I really hope that you're wrong, and I really hope I'm wrong. I think you're right. We should be worried about it. I think we started this conversation about inflation. Ultimately, UBI will just, like, anyone who owns a house, their house, quote unquote, value will go up. Really, you're just devaluing currency. I mean, it's very straightforward.
So, Brent, you can use this as an ad for real estate. Like, Richard Diaz says houses are going up, so buy now.
I mean, UBI is totally nuts, right? Like, think about it. You are basically giving everybody what, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000.
Yeah.
All you're doing is shifting. So we learn a lot of models in economics, and a lot of them are bogus. But one of the models that is pretty, I think, has lasted the test of time is supply and demand. So if your demand is relatively stable and you give everybody money, if your supply is relatively stable and fixed, and if you give everybody money, e.g. you allow them to increase demand without adjusting your supply, the price just goes up. And that's that's fundamentally what will happen if UBI exists.
So I would be remiss if I didn't have a reference to Rome in this episode. So
Do it. I love it.
So this would be the Roman Empire rather than the Republic. But like I'm thinking of the city of Rome, right? At its peak was around 1 million people and very dependent on grain from Egypt mainly. But basically the government was subsidizing the price of grain to the citizens. So I'm looking at that as that's kind of like, you know, a guaranteed or a universal basic income, same thing, because you know, it was not a democracy as we see it, but they were very much sort of held by the population of Rome, right? What happened in Rome by the populace really had an outsized effect as compared to the rest of the world. So that's why I kind of think like, yeah, the politicians are going to pander in a democracy, and yeah, that possibly why we'll see that. But that's my tie-in there is bread and circuses, right?
Yeah, I mean, I really hope Canadians. I don't know. I love Canada. I think my father was an immigrant to Canada. He thought Canada was the greatest country in the world. You know, he died about 15 years ago. In many ways, obviously I miss him every day, and in many ways I'm happy he didn't see what it's sort of come to. I think he would have been very, very disappointed, both from a cultural standpoint and certainly an economic standpoint. But what I think people just need to understand is there's no shortcuts. And this is something as you get older, right, you start, when you're a kid, you ignore your parents. When you're a little bit older, you think they're wrong about everything. And then when you become, I don't have any kids, sadly, but as I'm pushing 40, or I'm 40 a couple weeks ago, I'm realizing, oh crap, they were right about everything. and so, there are no shortcuts. And the difficult reality that our politicians refuse to tell Canadians is the only thing that matters, the only thing that can emancipate the working class is by improving productivity growth. Canada is in a productivity emergency. Those are the words of Canada's the deputy governor of the Central Bank of Canada, Carolyn Rogers, huge crush of mine. And last year she gave a speech about that and how it's an emergency. And again, central bankers are like auditors, and when they use language, they're very, very careful with their language, right? You're not going to hear an auditor say, this guy he's a criminal and a fraud. Auditors will say, he's lax in his accounting methodology, and but when they say that, it means the guy's liar, liar, pants on fire. And it's the same thing with lawyers, right? Lawyers will never say, well, maybe they'll say, but you know what I mean? Like, lawyers are very careful in their language. They're not going to say, this guy's a crook, this guy.
Podcasters, on the other hand,
but that's right. So podcasters obviously have a little bit of liberty there, but when central bankers say things like, or title their speeches "Time to Break the Glass," Canada's productivity emergence, like a problem. I'm butchering it, but she literally used the words "time to break the glass," and she literally used the words in her speech, Canada is facing a productivity emergency. When a central banker uses that language, it should raise, this is a 10 alarm fire. And no amount of UBI or all this fluff is going to fix it. Canada needs to.
Well, can you paint the picture with what does the productivity crisis look like in Canada?
So there's different ways to measure productivity, and I would say all of them are disappointing. All of them are flawed. Okay. So people
disappointing
will say,
as in
there's
not the
problems with
results.
it, right? Meaning they're all flawed, because how do you measure the productivity of a police station?
Right.
How do you measure the productivity of a brain surgeon or an astronaut? Or and so it's a flawed methodology, and I'm going to tell you the methodology, broadly speaking, is
how
just
do you
basically
measure the productivity of a climate scientist?
Right, exactly. Negative a trillion, it's impossible, right? So the issue is the way we do it, and the way we knowingly use a flawed methodology allows us for at least some basis for the start of a conversation. And so we use GDP per capita, right? Gross domestic product. And then we divide that by the number of people. And now all of a sudden it's in vogue in Canada to dismiss that measure, even though for 75 years no one complained about that as a measure. It's just when the Liberal Party has tanked our GDP per capita, everybody's now trying to reinvent the wheel. No one who's an economist or has studied economics thinks that is like, manna from heaven, right? We understand it is a flawed measure, but it's a useful one, and at least allows us for some scope to compare versus our peers and over time. And so GDP per capita in Canada has been flat for 10 years. That is, and when you think about human development indicators, whether it's a rich country, a middle income country, or a poor country, fundamentally, when you increase your GDP per capita, all of those human development indicators tend to rise in lockstep. Now, obviously, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, whatever. Meaning less crime, better outcomes for pregnant women, better educational outcomes, less murder, whatever it is. And so the idea that somehow, so Canada basically used to have GDP per capita rising lockstep with the US as an example. Again, the US is not the be-all end-all, but at least it's a comparable peer both in geography, culture, and wealth. And from 1994 to 2015, our GDP per capita rose lockstep with that country. They were a little bit richer, we were a little bit poorer, but at least our growth was in line. In 2015, for a number of factors, not just intruder necessarily alone, but number of factors, our GDP decoupled. And the issue was not that it decoupled and for a year or 2 years or even 5 years, but it has effectively totally been flat for 10 years. And this speaks to the lack of productivity growth. Now, and whereas the US GDP went up. Now, other countries have gone up as well. Poland, Ireland, even Turkey. Portugal. There's loads of countries that have had an improving productivity, e.g. GDP per capita.
Those are the
and
people
so the reason
they sent their unproductive people here.
Maybe, but
Not
the
Poland.
reason it's so.
We'll talk bad about Poland.
Poland's doing really, really well. But like the point is that the reason that's such a fundamental issue is because it is a proxy for standard of living, right? And so people are Canadian economists, and I would argue left-wing economists that are desperate to protect the horrific legacy of the last Liberal government, are turning themselves into pretzels to try to devalue that unit measure. And again, I want to be clear: nobody thinks that is the perfect. It's not the Bible. It's not perfect. It's there are flaws to that methodology, but come on, 10 years flat to down is a disaster by any standard. If we were talking about Haiti or Turkey or Uzbekistan, and someone said our GDP per capita used to be going up and now it's flat, everybody would be like, oh, there's something wrong with that economy. And so I would submit to you and the listeners that is what Carolyn Rogers is really fundamentally saying. The Canadian economy is broken. There's been a misallocation of resources. We are not doing the things necessary to improve the standard of living of everyday people.
Does that go hand in hand with the per capita part of that, where the population growth is, like if you do GDP per capita, like if GDP kind of flatlines and the capita goes up? Like
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like we didn't talk about immigration, but we kind of alluded to it, I think, a little bit, but just the massive wave of immigrants that have come in here and the makeup of those, are they contributing to the economy?
I mean, in my view, it's been a complete and unmitigated disaster. I think the allowing, so again, I need to qualify this, although I shouldn't have to. Both my parents are immigrants. 80% of the Portuguese people I know in Canada are immigrants or children of immigrants. Immigration writ large is not a problem. But the dose makes the poison. And fundamentally, and say, Richard, how could you say, like, our population growth from 1980 to 2015 was 319,000 people a year. That includes immigration, that includes births and naturally deaths, unfortunately. So you had basically a steady state of population growth. From 2016 to 2022, that jumped by a factor of 3. So you went from 320 odd thousand people per year to 900 and whatever thousand people. All of those people were immigrants. And more importantly, they were young and they were low skilled, right? And we know that they were low skilled because they literally were going to universities that otherwise wouldn't be accepting them. That's just a fact. So the problem with that is that there's a whole lot of problems with that. So again, if we had, let's say in a counter in a different universe, we had only allowed high skilled immigrants, doctors, lawyers, engineers, in theory, those people would be adding to our productive capacity, even though, let's say, the quote unquote number of population would be very high. But we know the number. This is not a mystery. We know these people were low skilled, low wage people, and so they were quote unquote detractors. Now, again, the problem isn't immigrants per se, but it's the type and the number. So had immigration risen by double, let's say from 300 to 600,000, and they had been low skilled, low wage, I would have argued that our economy probably would have been able to absorb a lot of that. Now, would it have hurt in some areas? Yes, rental prices would have gone up. You would have, youth unemployment might still be high, but it wouldn't be at a 50-year high, all these things. But to triple, and we know because the Bank of Canada has calculated it and it's on their website, we know that like 96% of all that population growth was basically importing low skilled, low wage labor. And so, this is, and 2 or 3 years ago when I was talking about this, people were deriding me as saying, I'm racist or this and that. Like, it's just math. I mean, you cannot increase population growth that has been running at a steady state of 319,000 for 35 years or whatever, and then triple that number, and then wonder why rents have gone up 25 or 30 or 40%. Wonder why healthcare outcomes have fallen. Wonder why, or all these things. Why youth unemployment is at a 50-year high. And so, Canadians are, in my view, way too nice. We don't want to discuss what is, in my view, the obvious thing. And it's been a complete disaster. It's been a complete and utter disaster. And will take 10 years or whatever to flesh out. Probably
longer. But in the words of a former leader, the infrastructure will balance itself.
I mean, it's a real shame. And I'll tell you something. The other thing that really bugs me is that we let those kids down. Right? Like so yes, we screwed our own economy up, but we let those kids down. Like, imagine you're some kid in, I don't know, somewhere in northern India, and you hear this opportunity, you've read this advertisement that if you go to Ontario and you go to this school, you're going to get a great job, and your parents, their GDP per capita is what, a tenth of Canada's? So you're the oldest son, because they're certainly not going to send the daughter. Your parents might have a little bit of money, they might borrow, and they put you on a plane, and all the hopes and dreams are with that kid who comes to Canada. And we've basically ripped them off. And so everybody's pissed. They're pissed because they don't feel like they've gotten a fair deal for their work, their effort, their blood, sweat, and tears. We know we've gotten a deal because they're not a high-skilled laborer. They're not, right? They're going to some bogus school in Ontario. And so everybody's disappointed. And fundamentally, that's where we're at. And so,
why did they do this in the first place?
So, I mean, yeah, we've talked about this on the podcast too, Rich. Like the sad state of affairs that is the diploma mills and our immigration program, and like, you talk about the suicides and the number of coffins that get shipped back to India every month, like the huge increase.
I didn't even know about that.
Well, because imagine you're that oldest son and you come here and you realize your parents mortgaged the family farm, and it was all for nothing. Because, yeah, you can get that diploma or whatever, or maybe you can't, but there's no opportunity here, and you're not going to be able to repay it. And, like, how do you deal with that shame, right? It's just, yeah, when you read some of the stories, like there's been some good reporting on this. It's incredibly sad. So taking a step back a little bit.
Sure.
The argument is we need immigration because of low fertility, right? And like, so as a Christian who is a very strong family advocate, and I got a bunch of kids, Brent has a bunch of kids, I kind of find this argument sort of funny, right? Like, I'm like, I know the answer, guys, but they're saying like our fertility is dropping. We need more people to stoke GDP, and that's why we need to have immigration, because that'll keep, it'll bump up GDP with the unspoken idea that like that will make our economy strong. So, like, I don't know, how do you respond to that?
Oh, so this is something I've thought a lot about, and I haven't quite been able to find sufficient evidence to prove my point. But I'm not afraid of conjecture, and
we love it here.
So the idea is, so let's just step back a second. The idea is like our demographics are quote unquote crap, meaning we're aging, and we don't have enough people to quote unquote fill in the coffers to pay for the next generation's pension. So like, let's leave aside the fact that sounds a lot like a Ponzi scheme for 1 second, and how morally bankrupt that is. Just let's put a pin in that. And that's the idea. And so that was the idea. It's like, our demographics are shit. We don't have enough people. We don't have a replacement rate, which is 2.1 children for family. So my theory, or I should say hypothesis, that I haven't been able to quite prove, but I spent a lot of time thinking about this, is I actually submit to you that it's backwards. It's because it is so expensive to raise children and so expensive to house them, and in effect impossible to buy a 3-bedroom house at a reasonable valuation with 1 salary or even 1.5 salaries, that I think people don't have as many children. And so they've inverted that view. This is my view, and again, I can't substantiate it. Like the other stuff, everything else I've said up to this point, I have like 10 charts to support that view. Going forward, this is much more about hypothesis and sort of more conjecture. But because it is so expensive to raise children, to house children, you in effect make it impossible for a regular family, a working class family, to have 1 or 2 children. And what you're seeing, this is where I submit some evidence, only really wealthy people are having, super religious people or really wealthy people are having many, many children. And
how many is that, by the way? What's many?
3 or 4 would be like considered a lot. No, okay. there was like they calculate this. Like,
your opinion, yeah.
No, to me 4 is a lot. 3 is, but again, 35 years ago, 100 years ago, 4 is nothing, right? You just bang those out. Now 4 would be considered an outlier family. I think it's fair to agree.
It's hard to find a car that you can fit 5 in.
Well, that's it. So what I think people have it wrong, and what makes this population boost of young people in particular so nasty, is that we were about to enter a period where there would have been a dearth or a shortage of labor. So there would not have been enough young people. All these old people have loads of money, so they have capital, and they need labor, and and young people in Canada would have been, well, we have no money, but we have offered capital, and the prices of like the wages would have had to go up, right? Because there would have been a dislocation of demand and supply. And so as a function of that, you would have, in my view, you would have had extremely good wage growth for youngish people, and they would have allowed to mitigate some of these issues around housing affordability and et cetera, et cetera. Instead, we flooded the market with cheap labor, which destroyed a generation of right. So it's just supply demand. It's just over and over again. And so to me, so your question about like this idea that we need to import loads and loads of people in order to pay for pensions is bananas to me. Like, what we need to increase our population is to do it organically, which is to make it a viable strategy for 1 income, or let's say 1.5 or 1.25 or 1.75. You know what I mean? Like a woman, I'm still of the view that women are the only sex that can bear children. Yeah, I know. I'll be tarred and feathered in a minute, but you know what I mean? And so I'm of the view that women are the...
I tried, and only my wife can do it. So
You know what I mean? So for, for I guess for an atheist, I have some pretty traditional values, but you know what I mean. And so for
Thanks,
one
Mark,
yeah,
for
but
that
I'm serious,
image.
right?
I can't.
But anyway, Mark, I don't know what you think about that, but that's sort of my view. It's like, that's my thinking on it.
We've debated
yeah.
that back and forth a bit.
Okay, I wanna hear what you
with
guys have to
Daniel Foch too the other day, we were talking about like what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like, is it the housing unaffordability that causes people to not have kids, or is it the people, not having kids that leads to like, developers, architects, like the whole process of building houses to make like smaller apartments where people can't fit a big family. It's like, well, okay, if there's no big families, then we're not going to build those for people. But we don't know which one comes first. But like, if you're an investor and you're building housing, for example, like what do you want to put on the market? Like 5-bedroom homes?
I hadn't thought of it that way. Because I've thought about it the other way, which is like, maybe I'm wrong because of things like, birth control. Like, for a long, like I was once, years and years ago, I was at a business meeting with this Arabic woman. And she was a sales lady for the company I used to work for. And she's like, oh, Arabic countries, they don't have, they're not having this fertility issue either. That's not true. If you look at a great website called, it's called Gapminder, great website. You can see that and what's really cool about this website is it shows you different yearly data, but over time, which is really cool. So, and you can like compare different countries. So you can compare like the most religious, let's say in this case, Islamic nations with the least religious, secular, let's say Nordic nations. And you can see over time what their birth rates are doing, let's say children per woman. And even Islamic countries are having a collapse in their birth rate, right? And so I showed this to her and she was surprised. And she was like, this was many, many years ago. Now it's, more common knowledge. And so fundamentally across the board, religious, not religious, rich, not rich, poor, whatever, everybody's having way less children due to birth control, et cetera, et cetera. But I would argue that over the last few years, it's collapsed. And in my view, so the counter argument to my proposed hypothesis, like structurally, women, like the opportunity cost for women is just too high. Right? So like if you're a lawyer and a female and you want to take 2 years out to have a baby, it's too high with respect to your career, and we've told women that they can have it all and they can't, and we've told men they can have it all and they can't. And so there's like this cognitive dissonance around that, and so they're not having children as a function of that, which is a fair counter argument. I don't have much to say against that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few factors, and I don't know what you would call it, but if you look at the charts again, whether it's is whatever nation, as wealth goes up, fertility drops.
Yeah,
and that's even borne out when you have like immigration from like Africa or countries that I'm lumping Africa to. I know there's many countries, but
no, I understand.
Nations that have high fertility, the second generation. If they, if they emigrate to the West, second generation fertility drops dramatically to match the existing thing. So, to me, I think there's an issue with consumerism. That's part of the issue, is that we value things more than people, and you kind of adjust your lifestyle expectations and requirements to what you have. So, and again, this is me as like a fundamentalist Christian, like have lots of kids, and people are too concerned about, how am I going to take care of my kids if they don't each have a bedroom and they can't each go to summer camp and have like, all this stuff, right? It's like, no, just whatever, cram them into a bedroom. They can share. They don't need all the fancy stuff. They don't all need an iPad, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, that's one of my primary arguments, is that we got to get back to that as Westerns. I mean, I care about Canada, so as Western civilization. But then there's definitely, just from talking to people, there's definitely the element of like, we just can't afford it, right? And the extreme example would be like South Korea, where for young people it's so bleak. And I mean, they have probably the worst fertility crisis in the world. But if you look at it, like, you can barely afford as a young person just like to live, right? To go out on your own. Like, it's pretty well impossible. So I could understand how you would think, like, how can I bring a child into this? So in Canada, I would say, there's counter arguments, like you can sacrifice, and there's ways maybe you don't have the lifestyle that you're accustomed to because your parents are boomers and you grew up in a nice big house, and you think that, well, when you get your first house, well, first of all, that you should have a house, and that when you do have a house, it's $1 million house, right? Like, my parents were immigrants as well. And when they were married, they lived in a shack, like above, sorry, they lived above a shack, right? Like, no running water and all that stuff. And, this is the typical, like, I'm getting older, but like, we grew up fine, right? We drank water from the garden hose, but like, they made it work, but they didn't have the expectations, right, that we have now, right? I have 5 children, and, my parents had 6, and I'm like, yeah, 6 would be, even that thinking creeps into my mind as well. Like 6, 7, 8 kids, like, yeah, I don't know. Part of it is like, I'm old and I'm tired now, but, anyway, so I think there's a lot of facets, but I'm more on like, have more kids and we'll solve our productivity crisis.
I totally agree with you. But I would just say, like, as somebody who wants children, I've been sort of unlucky in love, but I would say to you, one of the things that, again, somebody who not only wants children and is also thinking about the collapse in our birth rates and the knock-on effects, and I'm of the view that humanity is worth fighting for. Again, if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't know I was an atheist. But I just like, that's what
we're gonna work on you, Rich.
Yeah, exactly. Happy to have it. But like, what I mean is, like, I'll tell you something. I genuinely often think like my parents are immigrants. They gave me an incredible, like, I didn't have the PlayStations and the $200 jeans and whatever, but I didn't want for anything. What creeps into my mind personally is that I won't be able to give my kids the opportunities that my parents gave me. And to me, that is an indictment on our economy. We started this little bit of the section of the conversation about GDP per capita and how it's flatlined and all those things. That's what I'm talking. Like, to me, that is like a emotional manifestation of like a something you can calculate. Whereas like, I genuinely don't, like, unless I make an incredible amount of money, which is like, unless I'm like the 1% or 2% or whatever, I don't think I can give my kids what my parents gave me as, let's say, they were in the top 50% income earners. And so there has been a switch there. And I think now maybe that's something I need to reconcile with. My kids will be fine if they don't have a PlayStation or they don't go to private school. And,
that's the true cost of inflation right there, is what you're describing, this intergenerational thing where, yeah, it seems like it's fine to steal from future generations. That's what you're doing. You're literally stealing from future generations, and you're describing that pain. So,
like, if I sent my kids to private school, the only way I would be able, like, if I had a kid tomorrow and I want to send my kid to private school, the only way that I'd be able to do that is if I asked my boss for more money. And the second way is if my mom basically pulled out of her, like, RRSP, which she doesn't need the money. She's 75 years old. God willing, she'll live for another 10 years or 15 years. She'll just pull her out of her RRSP and pay for my kid's private school. Do you know what I'm saying? Whereas my parents owned a grocery store. My mom has 4 years of school. My dad has high school education. They ran a grocery store for 35 years and sent both me and my sister to one of the top schools in Montreal. And so the only way I could do that for my future kids is if I doubled my salary and would effectively make me in the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4% income earners in Canada. And so when you ask, so again, I'm of the view that it's never just one thing. I hate people who are like reductive in that way, and often I'm guilty of this myself, so I got to check myself a little bit. But in this conversation, I think that there's so many different things that are going on.
So, couple points. Number one is a question: does your mother like bug you? Like, where are my grandchildren?
Of course,
all
the time. Oh wait, no, bug me about. Sorry, I thought you meant just like full stop. Does she bug me? Yeah, she's a Portuguese woman.
Yeah,
she's annoying. She won't be listening. She listens to every Loonie Hour, but she probably won't listen to it. No, my mother's insufferable. She's like an overbearing Portuguese woman who's like,
Is she
I'm
named
40 years
Maria,
old. She
by the
asks
way?
me if I'm cold and like if I eaten and like.
And
Does she
if
bug me
you-
about kids? Yeah, she does for sure.
And so they're going to have to be named Manny and Maria, right?
No,
I'm pretty sure that's like a.
Although
Okay.
I don't know what I would name my kids. I don't know what I'd name my kids. I haven't really thought about that.
So point number 2, I looked it up, and Carolyn Rogers is married, so
Yeah, I
sorry
know.
about that. Point number 3.
I'm a researcher, Mark. At the end of the day, I know how to do research.
And hey, listen, if you're listening out there, Rich, nice guy, full head of hair,
Yeah.
contact us at the Two Stewards Show. So you're talking about affordability and so forth where you are now. So this is something that I've been talking with Brent about as well, is like, do we stay in Canada? Right? We're making it work for our kids, and we do send them to private school. Brent's the treasurer there, actually. But, it's tough, right? And it's getting tougher every year. So we're like, what do we do? And I've been talking with my wife about maybe moving to the States, right? If we could swing it, or thinking about other countries. So if you, have you ever considered that option? Is, maybe you can work remote. I don't know if you can, but you seem to be able to do it in Portugal. If you lived, I don't know, Portugal's a pretty big spot for expats, right? Could that work?
I mean, man, you're asking me some very soul-searching, introspective questions that I'm like almost afraid of. I'll always be transparent and authentic. I think that's one of the things that I'm probably known for better or for worse. The truth is, I would move to the United States in a heartbeat. But in reality, I can't, because
You don't have the $5 million for one of those golden visa
but
tickets.
okay, all jokes aside, I am authentic, and I want to pay less taxes. I'm not a quitter, and that makes me a sucker, I'm sure, on some level. If I had children, maybe my decision and attitude would be different, because when you have children, I imagine you stop thinking about yourself and you start focusing 100% on them. Maybe your wife a little bit, but mostly your kids, I guess.
Yeah, my wife always tells me there's a lot of stuff to care about, but only 4 of them have souls.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, all right, well, that's true.
I don't want to give up on Canada. My father sacrificed a lot. My mother, I still believe that Canada can fulfill its promise. Canada should be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. It can be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. It should have the social safety net that our taxes pay for. It has been criminally mismanaged. And I think that we need to un-F ourselves and to change direction. And if Canada does this, I think that it can fulfill the promise that it made, and from my parents and to this generation of kids that came here. And on some level, Mark, I don't want to give up. I feel like we have so much oil. We have so much water. We have every critical and rare earth metal you could literally want to fight any war ever. Because that's what it's about. Make no mistake. Like, we have everything. We have wood. We have grain. We have, okay, we don't have mangoes. Okay, fine. And I get it. We can't grow exotic fruit. Fine. Although you could probably do it in a greenhouse. Anyway, you know what I'm saying? Like, we have abundant energy and everything you need. So there is really no reason why Canada cannot fulfill the promise to immigrants, whether they be my parents or current ones. It is, in my view, the only thing that is stopping Canadians is ourselves.
So, okay, so here's, we should probably wrap up soon, but one more sort of bigger question. Whose responsibility is that? And this is a leading question, because I have a very strong theory that we need much smaller government, much less government, but that politicians aren't going to change anything unless the people in in a democracy anyways. I don't even know if democracy is the right thing for us, but Roman Republic, but right? Richard Diaz for senator.
Dude, I would love that.
You'd have to wear a toga. Okay?
I don't mind wearing a toga. It's very airy.
Yeah, that's fine. But anyway, so because we always talk about like, well, the government has to do this, they got to do that, and to me, it's like we got to reduce government and make like, yeah, if they got us into a situation, maybe they should get us out. But anyways, I think less government, the will of the people. People have to want all the things that you just described. The people have to want that, and I don't think as Canadians, most people are aware of what we could be. Like, why don't we have a sovereign wealth fund like Norway? And then and B, so how do we get people there? And should government take a leading role in this, or should we get rid of government? Like, what's your grand theory?
I mean, I love these questions. I think fundamentally there is absolutely a role of government. You need a government to coordinate laws and to punish murderers and to underwrite major infrastructure projects. I believe very strongly in the welfare state. I think that Canada, done right, I think, in my view, we're rich enough. We have the third largest oil reserves in the world. There is no reason that basic education and healthcare shouldn't be free. I think the problem is the dose makes the poison. And I think Canada has gone from, and I agree with you, Canada, how do we know? So you said the government should be smaller. I agree with you. How do I know this to be true? Public sector employment as a percentage of total is at a 30-year high.
What's the number? Do you know?
So 22 point something percent. If you give me a second, I can give you the exact number.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second.
Almost 22%.
Yeah, I got it for you. I can give you right now. It's 21.7%.
So 1 in 5 Canadians. 21. That's of available working age.
So people? That's of total employment.
Yeah. Okay.
So it'll be lower relative to the working age because the participation rate's a little bit whatever.
Yeah, but
the point is
1 in 5 working Canadians.
Exactly. So 21.7% of all employed people, this is part-time, this is self-employment, this is full-time, are working for the government. That is a 30-year high. At the exact same time, that public sector productivity is at a 10-year low and falling. So do we need less government? Unequivocally. There's no salient point that could argue that we need more government. We are taxed at a level that we have not been taxed in 22 years. How do I know this? Again, federal government tax take as a percentage of GDP is at a 20-year high. So we're getting outcomes. Pardon my French. We're getting worse outcomes with a higher price and more people delivering worse outcomes at a higher price. So fundamentally, but your question is, before that, so I agree with you 100%. The answer, again, and so another thing is like, in the last election, it was like save less, invest more, spend less, and that's gobbledygook. That's gobbledygook. How do I know this to be gobbledygook? Because Canada's gross fixed capital formation or investment or capex or whatever you want to call it has been flat for 10 years. It's about $500 billion in 2017 prices, 27 whatever in real terms. 420 odd billion of that, let's just say 400 of that is private sector, 100 billion is public sector. Public sector is at an all-time high, back to the 2010 high. I would say that's a good thing. We need bridges, we need ports, we need subways, etc. Fine. Private sector capex is completely flat and has been flat basically, despite some wiggles here and there, for almost 10 years or whatever. So the solutions we've been offered is more taxes, more government. And the reality is, and I would submit to you, sir, that I could literally demonstrate it with data, that taxes are too high and we need more private sector. And again, this is echoed by my crush, Carolyn Roger, who talks about this in her speech. So that's that. The problem is that we have this trust fund. And so you're a religious person. I'm sure you've met or dealt with people who've had severe addiction and crisis in their lives. And the reason I bring that up is like, how do you get those people to change course, whether they find it through God or whatever? They need to feel enough pain, whether it's themselves, they're in a hospital bed or with their family, in order to shake them out of the direction they're going, whether it's drug abuse or alcohol abuse or whatever is their demon, in order to say, whoa, this is bad, I need to change direction. And I would submit that the problem Canada has is that we have so much oil that we can't feel pain. It's like, imagine you meet a trust fund baby who, no matter how, every job he takes, he fails, every relationship he has, it crashes out. You know, he has no direction. He doesn't. Why? Because when he fails, he's got his daddy's trust fund. And Canada is a trust fund baby. And the only way that this kid will ever learn is if you take the money away and say, and I'm sure you've met people, you know, you're a religious person, you probably go to church, you've probably met people who've been down and out. And the only way they learn, in my view, and this is tough love, is when you say, you're on your last legs. We're not going to bail you out this time as parents. And Canada has a trust fund. Canada is effectively a trust fund baby addicted to coke who spends all his time skiing in the Alps.
Addicted to fentanyl.
Sure. But what I'm saying is, like, we will never have enough pain. Coca-Cola. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting myself in trouble here. I think it's a really important point, right? So, like, you asked me, when are we going to change? Will we realize it? How do we recognize we've gone down the wrong path? And I submit to you, I think Canada has not had anywhere near enough pain, and probably won't have enough pain. Sorry, my phone's ringing. And because we have this trust fund in the form of, 168 billion barrels of oil sitting in the ground. And so I don't know. I really hope that it doesn't take us, being in a hospital bed before we realize that we need to change direction. I really hope that we have our come to Jesus moment far sooner, that we recognize that everything is to play for. We have it all in front of us, that we can exploit our natural resources in an ethical and sustainable way, that we can have a strong welfare state, that we can pay for people's cancer treatment, and that people whose kids who are dying of leukemia don't have to mortgage their houses, and that we can pay for schools, whether, and stuff like that. But the idea that we need more government involvement is asinine. We know that this is not true because of the data is very, very, very clear on this. If the opposite was true, if we had high public sector employment and productivity of the public sector employment was rising, it would be a much more challenging argument to make in front of you. And I'd say, okay, fine, screw it. Maybe more government is the right answer. But it's not. So anyway, I know I went on a little bit there, but it's
Rich for Prime Minister. How about it?
Smaller government, more pain. Okay.
Was that your mother calling, by the way, Rich? Just checking on you?
That was my sister.
Oh, man. Okay, I think we need to... I would love to chat a lot more about CPI and various things, but we should wrap this one up. Yeah. We'll get you back. We'll get you back for sure. Yeah, Brent, sorry, I've been monopolizing this, but do you have any
I have no more questions. I got to run. I got to do a showing for basement apartment, so.
Okay, tell him Rich Diaz said house prices are going up.
Yeah,
okay?
so
take that to the bank.
Wait, can I give myself a plug?
Yeah, sure.
100%. Yeah, we're just about to do the plug, so go nuts.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Should I do? Okay.
Rich, how can people find you?
So you can find me on Twitter, which is, I'm a big fan of Twitter, which is probably where you can, if you want to get an insight into my sort of thought process, for better or for worse, you can find me on Richard Diaz _CFA or Richard Diaz CFA. There's a bunch of pretenders out there, which I guess I should be flattered about. But yeah, so let me give you the actual thing. It's Richard Diaz. I forgot it. It's been so many years. Forgive me. Which is very poor. Yeah, Richard Diaz _CFA. But the thing I'm really the most proud of right now, actually, and I would love for you guys to check it out and share with your friends, and is called the Ice Cap Canadian Market Wrap. Okay. And every week I do these like 8 to 10 minute vignettes. It's on YouTube about the Canadian economy and what it means for Canadians. So I talk about productivity. I talk about private capex. A lot of the stuff I've talked about today, you'll see charts. I'm not totally full of it. I promise you, there's lots of data to back up my statement. You know, I talk about employment, talk about productivity, export growth. We talk about inflation, and it's these quick hits of like 6 to 10 minutes, depending on the subject. It's called the ICE Cap Canadian Market Wrap. I would love if you can go check that out. I'd really appreciate it. And of course, there's the Loonie Hour.
We'll put it in the show notes as well. Is there any positive messaging in there, or is it all just doom and gloom? And
I mean,
like it's Canadian economics.
I mean, I'm a son of immigrants. I just think that like. I don't know what it is. I really genuinely believe Canada can fulfill
you're a
its
sucker
promise.
for punishment, man.
I am a sucker. You know what you know what it is, gents? I have faith.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
An atheist with faith. All right.
I have faith. I have faith that Canada will eventually make the right decision after it makes all the wrong ones.
All right. Awesome. We'll link to it. Yeah. No, really appreciate it, Rich.
Yeah, we appreciate your time, Richard. Valuable insights and great to get to know you a little bit better. So, people, check him out on Twitter and YouTube. And until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
If you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To learn more about the show, head on over to twostewards.ca and explore our free resources. To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We will see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.
Nailed it.